The education program that we're part of really aims to introduce economics to a broader and diverse group of students around Australia. And so as part of that, last year we ran a second wave of a survey of high school students to really get an update of the reasons why students choose to study economics, but also the reasons why students don't. And I think it's something that, of course, we all here feel really passionate about. So I'll be giving an update of, the findings from that survey, but really keen to hear your feedback in terms of whether you think, some of the insights you also see in the classroom, if it's different, and at the end, what actions can we actually take together to encourage more students to study economics? Firstly, I guess, why does this matter to the bank, but also generally, you're probably an audience I don't need to convince too hard, but, around 7 years ago, the RBA looked at the data and found this problem, that there was a dramatic decline in the number of economic enrolments in Australia, as you can see on the left. But there was also a diversity problem where, we're seeing fewer females, students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, from regional areas study economics. And, at the RBA, we make policy that affects all Australians. So it's really important that we have a diverse pipeline of economists because they're going to be the ones making policy in the future. And so we want, the policymakers to represent Australians. And the other, really important issue is economic literacy, right? Like, economics isn't just a subject, but it's also gives you all these useful everyday tools that, when you finish high school, you still remember them and you can use them in everyday life. So we believe it's important that, more students can study economics and equip themselves with these useful skills. First up, just talk a little bit about the survey that we ran, what it included, and then I'll go on to the findings, which revolves around two key questions. So, who's choosing to study economics in 2024, and what are the reasons? What are the factors influencing their decisions? So it's actually the second time that the RBA has ran this survey. So the first time was in 2019, and we surveyed students from years 10 to 12 in New South Wales. And we chose New South Wales because it's the only state where we have school-level data, and that's been really important for us to enrich the analysis. But of course, really keen to hear if you think these insights are relevant for the other states as well. We have a representative sample of the student population in New South Wales. So we had 38 schools and 4,370 students complete the survey. And the questionnaire was, really asking questions about how and why students pick subjects, including economics, and also more generally, their perceptions about economics. So, a lot has happened since 2019. So we thought it was, timely to get an update on these reasons, the factors influencing these decisions. So we know there was the global pandemic, period of high inflation that really put economics into the public spotlight and into, discussions in living rooms for many students. In New South Wales, there was also a new economics module that was mandatory in the years 9 to 10 commerce elective. So prior to 2020, it was only an optional module. So not every commerce student needed to study it, but now every commerce student is exposed to at least some basic economic concepts. So we really wanted to see whether that's had any effect on students' perceptions of economics and whether they want to study it as well. First of all, looking at, who's choosing to study economics, has this changed since 2019? Really, the answer to that is not really. So the patterns are still pretty similar. So in terms of the schools that offer economics, it tends to be, concentrated in the schools that have higher socioeconomic status, tends to be all boys, government selective, and have a higher share of culturally and linguistically diverse students. And those are the characteristics that I find to be, most significantly associated with offering economics. At the same time, in terms of the students that study economics, so similar to what we saw in 2019, male students are still significantly more likely to want to study economics compared to female students. And, these results hold even after accounting for school factors, individual factors, and a range of other characteristics. I think what's more interesting, the results from the survey is about the factors that influence these decisions. There are both, as we like to put it, demand-side factors and supply-side factors when it comes to whether a student wants to choose to study economics. So on the demand side, it's about, whether the students are interested in doing it. How do they perceive the rival or other similar subjects like business studies versus economics? And on the supply side, it's about whether the school actually offers it as a subject. Do they have the teachers who can actually teach economics? So both are equally important, but because this survey is, only for high school students, really, I'm just acknowledging that it's mostly focusing on the demand side factors here. First of all, why do students choose economics? What I find is that the most common reasons are that, students are interested in studying economics. They think they can gain useful everyday skills. They think they can do well at it, and the ATAR scaling effect. So that seems to be kind of consistent with at least some of the conversations I've had with you, over morning tea. And so the motivations for studying economics has actually been pretty consistent over time. But we think that's a good thing. In terms of reasons for doing economics, because they want to do economics in the future as a career and as, at university, those are sort of, reasons a little bit lower down, and it's actually sort of declined in importance over time. So that graph was for, all the students already studying economics. But we're also interested in saying, overall, even including those students who don't do economics, what do they actually think about it? What is good to see is that, overall, students continue to have pretty positive perceptions of economics as a field. So they think that economics can be used for social good. It's not all about money, and it doesn't lead to careers that's more for men than women. It's, for all. So that's good to see. What else is also positive is that students, do recognize the value from studying economics in high school. So they think economics is important to know in today's society. It's a subject that scales well, and it will teach them useful everyday skills. So those are all the things that we love about economics, and it seems like the students also understand that. So, if these perceptions are so positive, then what's stopping more students from studying economics? It seems that, overall, that students aren't super interested in studying economics. So it's probably not the economic students in your classrooms, but sort of maybe those who aren't studying economics at the moment. They sort of just don't find it interesting, don't want to know more about it. And it's actually worsened a little bit since 2019, which is quite puzzling because we thought with the greater attention on economic issues since then that, people will be more interested in it. But I guess my hypothesis is that perhaps a lot of students just don't know what economics is about still, and they're not connecting the things they're hearing about on the news, in discussions with the families, to the things they can learn, at school. So there seems to be still limited understanding of what economics is and the career pathways available for those studying economics. And so this is overall, so years 10 to 12 students, including those not studying economics. In New South Wales, at least, students also perceive economics to have a heavier workload than other subjects. So curious to hear if that's also the case in other states. And students generally prefer business studies over economics because they think it's more useful, interesting, and that it's easier. Although that preference has actually diminished a little bit since 2019. But I think overall the picture is that, students do see the value from studying economics, but there are some key barriers that still persist today. So concerns over workload, limited understanding of what it is, which might translate to lower interest, and preference for these other business studies subjects. So those are some things that we still think about that needs to be addressed. The other, angle that we're thinking about this is, well, what if students had early exposure to economics before years 11 to 12? Does that have any impact on it? As I mentioned, in New South Wales, students can study the commerce elective in years 9 to 10. And what we find is that the majority of economic students actually took the commerce elective in years 9 to 10. So actually 80% of them, as we can see on the green bar on the left. And so that's saying that, commerce elective is a really important stepping stone to the economics pathway. And I guess the implication is, commerce is a good pool of students to target if we want to increase enrollments into economics. Obviously, though, not every commerce student will end up doing economics. So what's the share? So we had a new question that asked students, the commerce students, in 2024, how many intend to do economics next year? And actually quite a decently sized pool. So around 40% of current commerce students intend to do economics next year. Around 1/2 of these students want to do business studies. So that's quite a decent amount. And what's notable is that, those who do commerce in years 9 to 10 are significantly more likely to want to study economics compared to those students who don't do commerce. So again, really emphasizing the importance of, that early exposure to economics. It's partly because commerce students will have more better perceptions of economics. They feel more confident in doing it. They at least know what's it about. So there's this gap in perceptions. And what I find is that this gap in perceptions has actually widened since 2019. Essentially, the commerce students now are even more confident they could do well in economics. They're more likely to, have a better understanding of economics, be interested in it. So it's sort of like the additional impact to what we saw in 2019. And, that's positive news. It can reflect the impact of this mandatory economics module that was added to the commerce syllabus. So really emphasizing that, early exposure matters and it can improve perceptions and the likelihood of doing economics. So I'll touch on 2 other areas as well in the survey. So, a lot has happened since 2019, as I've said. So we wanted to get an update on, what are the topics in the curriculum that students are more interested in? Has that changed over time or not? And again, curious to see if these results, match up with what you're hearing in the classroom. So we gave students a list of different topics, as you can see up there, and they were asked to pick the top 2 topics that they were most interested in. And so, compared to 2019, the 2 topics that saw the biggest increase in interest would be income determinants, so this is the second on the top, as well as wealth distribution. So we think that's potentially reflecting, cost of living concerns and, people connecting that what's happening around them to the things they want to learn most about in the classroom. And global economy, issues to do with that is the most popular topic. So potentially, again, reflecting what's happening around the world with tariffs, geopolitical tensions and all that. So I guess really emphasizing that, I guess things that we already know that, students are interested in the things that relate to them, that are on the news, that are useful everyday life. We also wanted to get an understanding of, perhaps what are some other problems that students want to learn about, but that's not currently in the curriculum. So we gave students a free text, option, and they could put any problems they were interested in. And so the main problems that students were interested in were to do with social inequality, so including racial discrimination, gender gaps, and this is followed by health and well-being, so including mental health, social economic inequality, which includes poverty and homelessness, environment and, war crime and politics and law. And this is actually quite similar to the results we see internationally in terms of the problems that students today want to learn about and work on. I guess the other thing to note here is that, actually 1 in 4 students in the survey actually picked the option of none of the above. And I had to go through and read all the responses in terms of why. And overwhelmingly, a lot of them just said boring. And I guess to some extent, it's realistic. Like not every student is going to be interested in economics, and that's okay. But I guess what is more relevant would be, those students who said, all these topics are all related to money and business, and I'm not interested in that, which suggests that there's still some lingering misperceptions out there. As well as those students who said, I'm not interested in learning about society and people, but I like calculation and logic like maths and science, which is quite interesting as well, in the sense that maybe they think it's all, economics is only humanities and it doesn't include the problem-solving nature like you see in maths. So again, perhaps still some misperceptions out there. Lastly, I'll just provide some new insights into dropout rates in economics, which we haven't looked into before. But unfortunately, we found that economics has one of the highest student dropout rates between years 11 and 12 in New South Wales. It's risen since 2019 when it used to be more sort of on par with other subjects. But, there's a higher dropout rate in economics compared to, other perceived challenging STEM subjects like physics. But it's also higher than humanities like business studies. So it's quite puzzling, and we asked students, those that dropped out of economics, why. And those were sort of the five most common reasons. So lack of interest, feeling like there weren't enough resources to support their learning, not doing well in the subject, finding it too difficult, and I guess related to that, dropping the subject so they can, spend more time on other subjects to maximize their ATAR. And I guess also related to that would be concerns about the workload, that they think the syllabus is too content heavy, and yeah, the workload much exceeds, other subjects. So it seems that, we think a lot about getting more students doing economics in year 11 and 12, but it's equally important to think about how to retain these students throughout years 11 to 12. I've presented a lot of findings today, but I guess overall, it would say that, economics seems to still have an image problem amongst a lot of students, I guess particularly those who have no exposure to economics. But I guess there are some promising signs that, if you expose students earlier in junior high school about some basic economic concepts, that they're more likely to feel confident they could do it, they're more interested in it, and they at least understand what's it about. So from an economic literacy angle, there's value from that as well. I think the real question is, how to make economics more appealing. One way is to leverage the already positive perceptions that students have. So frame communications around, you can make an impact with an economics career. You can learn everyday skills. And to also showcase the different career possibilities from studying economics and showcasing different role models in economics, particularly women. On the curriculum side, as I've sort of said a lot in this presentation already, I think early exposure matters. So, thinking about ways to introduce economics earlier in junior high school, whether that's through ACARA, or those, years 9 to 10 electives like commerce, but in different states. Also, in terms of the curriculum, what are the topics that are actually included in the curriculum? Are those the same topics that appeal to students today? And do they also appeal to, underrepresented groups like females and lower SES students? And the last thing was to do with the supply side. So, the research really focused on students and the demand side, but, we know that, passionate economic teachers like yourselves play a really important role in actually bringing the subject to life in the classroom and sparking interest. And so, we recognize the importance of professional development opportunities like today, but also providing resources for the classroom for teachers. And finally, economics is not offered at every school in Australia, is actually sort of declining that share. And so really important to think about what are some supply side initiatives that can help more schools to, offer economics, particularly in those less advantaged areas.